Well, hello everybody. Good morning or good evening, depending on where in the world you are. And welcome to session 3 of your Metabolic Dietary Solutions program. I'm so excited to be leading this webinar today. Dr. Carr is away. She's busy presenting at a conference in Malaysia, and she's sharing her brilliance with a whole bunch of other professionals, and I get to lead the call with you, which is really exciting. I wanted to start today by asking a question out to anybody who's listening and who's on the webinar and who wanted to share what changes have you made over the last couple of weeks, and how has your intention or the story of your why been impacting some of the changes that are being made. It could be that you're looking to be healthier, and thus you've become a little bit more mindful of some of the foods that you put on your plate. It could be something as wonderful and as simple as switching your rice for cauliflower rice. It will make a huge difference to the impact, to the carbohydrate impact, the sugar impact on your body, and thus the impact of the fat deposits on your belly. It could be something a little bit more advanced. Maybe you were able to implement Dr. Carr's suggestion of a 12-12 fasting, feasting type window, which is fantastic. You might have taken that a little further. I've been following this protocol for quite a few years now, and what it has given me is a huge amount of freedom. And my basic daily routine, which people find often weird, and I say basic because fasting fits me, so it's flexible, so it depends on what's going on in my life. But for the most part, I don't eat until between 1 and 2 in the afternoon, and then I have a really nice big meal. And then I usually don't eat again. Sometimes I might have a little snack at 5 or 6 o'clock, but generally I have dinner. We eat dinner quite late in our house, between 7 and 8. And I have a large dinner. Sometimes I even have an indulgent high-fat dessert. And that is my life. Sometimes we go out for brunch, which means I eat a little earlier. Sometimes I'm busy or I'm traveling. And what this has allowed me to do is it's given my body a whole lot of flexibility, so that if I need to go until 3 or 4 or 5 or from dinner till dinner without something to eat, that's okay. I deal with that. It also means that if I'm in a situation where I'm not sure if that's the right kind of food I want to put into my body at that moment, I don't have to, right? I don't feel like I'm so hungry that if I don't eat even the piece of cardboard, I will keel over. So these are some of the benefits that I have experienced, but this takes lots and lots of practice. I've been doing this for years and years and years. And for me, it started the same way as for you, with simple little swaps. I took all the grains off my plate. So I chose not to eat wheat, not to eat rice, not to eat oats anymore. I used to have oatmeal for breakfast every single morning. It was the best thing ever. I would wake up looking forward to it. I took that off my plate. I still ate lots of legumes. I actually was eating a lot of lentils and a lot of chickpeas at the time. And I increased my fats. And I just changed the way that I built my plate. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So again, I'm going to open it up. You guys can post a question in the Q&A section if you would like. Otherwise, and I don't see anybody as having posted a question yet, but feel free to do that at any time during the session, and that way I can get to it. So again, welcome. And I'm so glad. I'm so sorry. My little dog got really excited this morning, and it's snowing outside here in Canada, and he didn't get to go for his walk because it's snowing, so he's a little excited. I apologize for the noise. Anyway, back to our food choices. So it becomes really important that this is a journey, right? This isn't perfection on a plate today. This isn't about right or wrong or good or bad when it comes to food. It's about making the decision that best serves us right now. And this is why I was so insistent on finding our whys and talking about our stories in the very beginning, because when we become aware of it, and it's not just something that you think about in your head, when it's something that you actually write down, or it's something that you verbalize to somebody else, it's a lot more real, and we become a lot more accountable. And what happens is each time we make a choice, that is something that we can reflect back to and decide, is it in alignment with that? Sometimes it might be, and that's fantastic. Sometimes it might not be, but we might be making a choice for a different reason. Food serves the purpose of nutrition in our lives, and I believe that should be the primary source of food. But it's not the only source of food. It's not the only reason that we eat. Food often allows us to have a social connection with people. You know, we eat at a table, we eat with our families. Food has emotional connections as well. And sometimes food just tastes good, gives us pleasure, and that's okay. And what this process, as we go through it together, will allow you to do is make those choices of eating for pleasure and it being okay without it impacting that long-term goal. It also means that the choices of eating for pleasure truly become eating for pleasure. So if we know that so-and-so's food is not that great, or that dessert from that restaurant isn't the best, it might not be worth having. I'd rather wait and get it from a good place. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. So I wanted to review where we are right now, and what we have asked everybody to do is work on getting towards a 12-12 program, which means that for 12 hours of your 24-hour day, you don't eat, and for 12 hours you do. Now, that doesn't mean that you constantly eat for 12 hours, but it means that within that window, that feeding window, is when you can eat. Now, the wonderful thing about not eating for 12 hours is often, for many of those, we're asleep. So we like to keep that one in the evening, and then it's just working out a schedule for you. Today, I might challenge you a little later to maybe look at 13 or 14 hours of not sleeping. Not every day. I mean, of not eating, sorry, not sleeping. You need to sleep. And you can not sleep for longer than that. But not eating for 13 to 14 hours. So just extending that by about an hour before we break our fast or have our breakfast. So again, that is a challenge for today. But something that often comes up after that, and although Dr. Carr has discussed with you replacing the rice on your plate for cauliflower rice, the question I get asked the most is, what do I eat? How do I build my plate? You know, you're asking me to make some changes. If we're going to make some changes in the foods that we're choosing, because we do want to lose some weight and we want to accelerate that process a little bit, how do we most effectively build our plate? So that big question, right? What the heck do I eat? And I've actually found that it's quite simple. People tend to overcomplicate it quite a bit. They tend to overthink it, and I like to make it simple so that wherever you are, it's easy for you to make a meal or to build a plate. And I've done this on 2 levels specifically, because it depends on where you are in the process. So if you are still doing a little bit of grain, there is a plate that we can build for you. And if you've chosen to eliminate all grains, which means the wheat and the flour-based rotis, then we have a plate for you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I can just, okay. Right. So I'm hoping that, oh, I think this is the wrong one. I apologize. I'm just going to share the first one with you. Oh, no, I only have this one, it seems. Okay. So how we like to build a plate, or how I like to build a plate, is to focus on our proteins and our fats and our non-starchy vegetables before we focus on anything else. And this applies to you whether you are a vegetarian or whether you are a meat eater. So we like to include around 4 to 6 ounces generally of protein. Protein is one of those macronutrients, which we have 3 macronutrients: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And protein is one of those that we definitely need. If you don't have protein, you will die. But we don't need too much. We need enough to repair our muscles and our cells that we've used the day before, and to restore some function. You know, things get used, things have to be recycled in the body, but we don't need too much, because we cannot store protein as it is. So what happens when we eat too much protein is the body, being the wonderful, efficient tool that it is, takes the protein and converts it into sugars. Because sugars we can either use as energy, or sugars we can store as fat in our belly. So as important as it is to be switching out our rice, which we know turns to sugar really fast, it's as important to be sure that we're not eating too much protein. So 4 to 6 ounces tends to work well. How much is that? I'm not asking you to go and weigh your food every single time, but it's generally about the size of the palm of your hand. And the wonderful thing is that the palm of my hand is a different size from the palm of your hand, which means that the amount of protein that I need is different from the amount of protein that you need, which it should be, because we're each different people. Then we always want you to add 1 to 2 cups of non-starchy vegetables. And that includes any vegetable, really easy, any vegetable that grows above the ground. So if it grows above the ground, put lots and lots and lots of that on your plate. I just want to get back to the protein for a moment, because for meat eaters, that's easy. For you vegetarians who are joining the program, that can be a little more difficult. And this is where we're looking at probably between half and 1 cup of legumes. All right, so between half to 1 cup of legumes should suffice your protein requirement for that meal, not for the day, for that meal, which is great. We also want to make a concerted effort to add fat to our plate. And why I say add fat, it's not the fat that you cook with, it's not the fat that's naturally in that food. It's fat that we need to add. And why is because they've done some research on something called satiety. And there's a difference, and I'm sure you've all felt the difference, between being physically full and actually not wanting any more. And I always say that something like rice or popcorn are great examples of how we can be physically full but still continue to eat. Your belly is distended, but you can still put food in your mouth. And satiety is that point where if you eat anything, doesn't matter what it is, you will not do it. You cannot. There is absolutely no desire for food. It's also that feeling of, I'm good now. I've had enough. Now, interestingly, the food on its own that promotes satiety the most is the white potato. I'm not telling you to go and eat white potatoes, because this only works when the white potato is eaten 100% on its own, maybe with some salt. So no ghee, no butter, no sauce, no nothing, plain white potato. And if you think about that, it's relatively unappealing, and you can only eat so much of it. However, what they have discovered is that the combination of protein and fat is exponentially more satisfying and triggers those satiety hormones and makes us feel full than any other combination. Conversely, the combination that is the least satisfying is starch and fat. So sugar and fat or starch and fat are the least satisfying, which is why it's often difficult to moderate our potato chip consumption or our chocolate consumption or our dessert consumption, because that combination, that fatty sweet, fatty starchy combination ends up stimulating your appetite rather than satisfying your appetite. So really important when you're building your plate to include extra fat with your protein. This is the key to keeping you full and to making you feel good from your meals. Also, when we start to reduce our carbohydrate load, so we've taken away the calories that you are eating with the rice, because we've replaced it with cauliflower rice, which not only has much less carbohydrate, but much less calories, we need to give your body an alternate source of fuel. And we'll get a lot more into that later in the program. But the perfect alternate source of fuel is a healthy fat. Now, in your MDS portal, I have given you a handout on what constitutes a healthy fat, and we've spoken about, and we have a video, I think we have a video, Dr. Cara and I, about what constitutes healthy fats in both the Western diet and the Eastern, the Indian diet, which so that we can make choices, because unhealthy fats are as bad for us as any other unhealthy choice. And again, an easy way to go through that is to say that if it's a naturally oily product and it makes a fat, that's great. We want things that are more closer to their natural state. So olive oil, coconut oil, real ghee, not vegetable ghee, maybe some avocados or some avocado oil, some nuts and seeds, as long as they're not roasted in some man-made oils like canola or cottonseed. So the basics of your plate, the basics of anything that you eat, I always call it my protein, fat, and fiber combination. You want to make sure that you have some protein. You want to make sure that you have some fat. And then you want to make sure that you have a whole bunch of fibrous vegetables. Now, if you don't have the vegetables and you just have the protein and the fat, that's okay. But if you have the vegetables, you need the protein and the fat. So it definitely goes in that order. Then we have some optional things to add onto that. We can add a little bit of dairy if you wanted. So if you wanted some cheese or some yogurt, feel free to have that. Make sure to choose full fat dairy options, because the lower the fat in the dairy, the higher the sugar content. You also want to make sure that you choose unsweetened options. Homemade is always best if we can, but if you're buying it, you just want to get full fat, you want to get unsweetened, read your ingredient labels. You can also add an extra half a cup of starchy vegetables, and that's not a lot. Half a cup is a small handful, so it's about the amount in the palm of your hand. And that could be something like potato or sweet potato, or carrots or turnips, or anything that grows under the ground. And that's only optional. You don't need to have the dairy and you don't need to have the starchy vegetables. But know that and so every single meal does not need to contain all of these things. However, if you wanted to, you could. And then the last thing that I've added here is something called activity carbohydrates. And the reason that these are important is for those of us who are incredibly active. And I'm not talking walking from your car to the grocery store in the parking lot. I'm talking about if you have a job where you are doing physical labor all day. I'm talking about if you are going to the gym and lifting weights to such a degree that you are so exhausted afterwards you could have a nap. Really, really intense physical activity. Then you can add a little bit of extra starchy vegetable if you wanted. However, I think for most of us right now, this probably does not count. Again, within our options, and this was something in my other slide that sadly I did not have properly for you, but within the other options, we also have the option for a little bit of grain if you wanted. We are encouraging you to switch out your grains for something like a cauliflower rice, or switch out your wheat roti for a chickpea flour roti, and there's lots of recipes. I think we've posted one that's really great. So I would prefer that you didn't add any grains. However, you could, instead of your starchy vegetable, if you so wanted, once in a while. So this would constitute most meals. Now, a snack, if you need a smaller meal, of course, we're not looking at 4 ounces of protein every single time that you eat. I'm just looking at, this would be how to build a plate for a meal. In an ideal world, if you are eating enough protein and you are eating enough fat at your meal, you should be quite comfortable to go about 4 or 5 hours without eating, which will take us to our next meal. That can sometimes be difficult in a world where we've been trained to eat every 2 to 3 hours. Now, generally, when we're eating every 2 to 3 hours, we're eating something that is starch or carbohydrate or sugar-based with maybe a little bit of fat. You could think about a granola bar or some oatmeal, or even just some fruit on its own. It's got a lot more carbohydrate in it than it does protein or fat. And we know from our satiety studies and how these work on our hormones that these do not satisfy our appetite for any length of time. And when we look at the insulin cycle and how insulin has to deal with sugar in our blood, when we eat a meal that's a lot more carbohydrate dense than protein and fat dense, our blood sugar goes up, and then our blood sugar crashes down, and then it needs to go up again, and we land up on this blood sugar roller coaster of constantly needing to refuel. As we slowly switch our bodies to using the healthy fats that we're consuming as energy, we find that we have a much longer, slower burn. So we can go for a while without having to eat, which is a wonderful thing. That brings me to a question that I thought about that I didn't put on the slide, is where does fruit fit into this? And again, ideally, fruit has some sugar in it, right? I call it nature's candy, and I also call it the gateway drug to sugar addiction. And the reason that I do that is because often we say, oh yeah, I don't eat sweets, I eat fruit, it's healthy. But fruit is sweet, and fruit stimulates our desire for sweet. Fruit also does not stimulate our satiety hormones in any way. Even whole fruit, which does a little, whole fruit eaten in the whole form, but it won't do it in any way on its own like a protein and fat heavy meal. And the more sweet we taste, the more sweet we want. So I would like to say limit your fruits to 1 fruit a day, maybe 2 at a maximum. And again, always combine your fruit with some protein and some fat. So what does that look like? We could either have fruit as a dessert after our meal. Instead of our half a cup of starchy vegetables, you could include fruit instead. If you do need to have a little snack or a smaller meal, you could have some fruit maybe with some cheese, or some fruit with an egg, or some fruit with some nuts, or some nut butter, because nuts have both protein and fat in them. So there is a way to include fruit in the diet, but I would be very mindful. The same way we're becoming mindful of our starches, we want to become mindful of our fruits. So this is how I look at every single meal. You know, as I said, the meal on the plate, lots of 4 ounces of protein, all the starchy vegetables. If we're looking at a small snack, just stick to my formula, PFF, protein, fat, and fiber. Do I have some protein there? Do I have some added fat there? Do I have some fiber? And as long as you can follow those principles, you will find that you begin to build meals that not only are good for you and good for your belly, but they satisfy you and allow you to go for longer and longer times without eating. And the longer we can go without eating, we need to eat. This isn't about never eating, but using those times where we don't eat can really stimulate and activate and kickstart and accelerate our fat burning. I'm going to stop my screen share right now. And I'm hoping that this has helped with what we are going to be doing moving forward to the next week. Does anybody have any questions or any comments about any of that? Okay, so that's fantastic. So let's go through really briefly what we're going to be, what our aim is for the next week. So our aim over the whole program is obviously to get you healthier and to get that belly fat, or wherever you find your fat is, to get that gone. How we do that is we use the premise of not eating to actually use our own stored energy. And when we do eat, we want to keep our body using our own stored energy as much as possible, and just relying on the food that we're eating to supplement it and to give us all our vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. The way that happens is by controlling our master fat fertilizing hormone called insulin. And we know that the thing that stimulates insulin the most, which means the thing that stimulates fat storage the most, is starches and sugars, as well as bad for you oils. But that's a different conversation, and I would watch our video about that. But starches and sugars stimulate fat burning. But it's difficult for us in our world, where many of our foods and our food choices and our government guidelines are based around starches and sugars. So we are trying to teach you slowly how to build a plate around proteins, fats, and fibers, so that you're getting all the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that you need. You're getting all the fiber that you need without the starch. And fiber is good for our digestion. It's good for the bacteria in our gut. It's good for our elimination. And you're getting energy from fats rather than from sugars, so that our insulin isn't stimulated constantly and consistently to keep us, number one, on the hunger train, and number two, on the fat storage train. So people often find that even by doing something just as simple as switching out rice for cauliflower rice, they have a huge difference, because they're not stimulating their insulin quite as much every single time that they're choosing to eat a meal. And what we want to do is take this to the next level, and then to the next level. Now, as we have said in this program, this is all about you. This isn't about right and wrong or good and bad. This is about doing what works for you and for your life. So as we go through our levels and as we go through our progression, it's important, number one, of course, to participate. You're here for a reason, but it's important to understand how these things can fit in with your life. And having these webinars once a week is really a great time for you to get feedback on whether what you're doing is supportive, or answer questions on why you should be doing it or how you can tweak something. So the showing up at the webinar, or the being here is the best time for you to get clarity. At the same time, as we move from level to level, you might find that you've done something, you're experiencing great results, and you're comfortable to stay there right now. You don't have to move along at the same speed that we are in any way whatsoever. And if something doesn't resonate or doesn't fit into your life, that is okay. I will tell you that, as I said, the journey that we go on together will accelerate results greatly, but we can also modify things, and you can learn to modify things and go along at your own pace. So for this week, we're going to look at our 12-12 eating window. If you've gotten there already, that's fantastic. Let's try and extend it to maybe 13 or 14 hours without eating, and then choose your first meal and your second meal and your third meal around what we've learned today, which is building your plate around proteins, fats, and fibers. We're going to keep on, of course, replacing that white rice with our cauliflower rice. We're going to work on replacing our wheat flour roti with some chickpea flour roti, which will really help, and adding good fats every time that we eat. So for the last time, before I close it off today, I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions or anything that they need clarity on before I leave you to the wind for the next week, and we can follow up. And I think Dr. Cara and I will be together on the webinar next week, which will be really fantastic, because last week I was away and this week she's away. So we've missed each other, and it's nice to connect and to see you guys together. So I'm hoping that everybody got some good information today and some good action steps on how to move forward for the next week. Last call for questions, just in case something comes up. Well, I'm going to take that as I've done my job really well. I'm going to wish you guys a fabulous Friday evening, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much.